everyone, and welcome back. I've got a nice shiny intro, upping my production value with Doodly. We'll see if it's worth the money in the future or not. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today was the fact that I had to up the resources that my EC2 instance used in order to be able to use things like Visual Studio and SQL Server Management Studio and all those kind of good things. And so now I want to turn it off all the time rather than having it on all the time. So what happens? I want to use my stuff. I want to learn something. I want to figure something out. All right, well, what do? Like, open up AWS Management Console and log in. I use Authy to do my little access code. And all this stuff takes time. And maybe I just want to go in, do something, and come out. So I go in, I log in, I go to EC2, right, and I go to instances, and then I click on my instance, and I click instance state, start instance, and all these things take time. And now it's saying pending, which is great, you know, nice interface, Amazon, I appreciate that. And here we go. And now it says it's running, so that's awesome. Then I go here and I click on copy. And I go down here and I go on remote desktop. And I'm already just incredibly bored. And I put it in there and I hit connect. This I don't think I can fix, at least not yet. Gotta log in. And I suspect there's a way I can send that user ID and password. And I click on that, and I click yes. And there I am. I'm finally in. And all that took time. Not a huge amount of time, but time. And if you have to do this a few times, I just shut it down. You know, it all adds up. Or it's frustrating, and you're like, I don't really want to do all that just to go in and test this one thing, and then you forget about it or whatever. By the way, today's shirt, Marvel, my chubby belly. Tell who's that. Alright, so how do I avoid all this? And one way to avoid it is to use code. Visual Studio Code and PowerShell. So I've created a file here, and we're going to go through this, and then we're going to use it. And then you'll know how to do this as well. And I know there's easier ways to do this. I was just going over the code for this video, and I'm going, you know, I could do this another way. But this shows some of the basic structures of programming in PowerShell, which kind of sounds odd, you know, you can apply in other cases. So let's just jump into the code. All right, line 2 here says new variable dash name. So there's my variable name dash value, and there's my value. It seems a little wordy, and I think there's a lot shorter ways that we could do that, like $timeout equals 60. We could do $EC2 ID equals that. But let's keep it this way for now. And then another variable, RDS name, so that's the connection that we're going to connect to. There's my instance ID. And over here, dev status. This is the status of the EC2 instance. But we've done something different here. And you'll have to set up AWS inside of PowerShell to take advantage of this. In this case, though, my .value is calling this function. I'm passing it my EC2 ID. And I'm going .instances, .state, .name. So we've got the name of the state. And I just displaying some values here. Get variable. This is probably when I was debugging, so we probably don't even need these lines of code. But they're there, and they're not the worst thing in the world. So then we check. We have a basic if statement, one of the fundamental structures of programming. If dev status, this is what we declared up here, $dev status equals stopped. This is tiny bit weird. I mean, you know, Microsoft created C#, and I would just put an equal here, and that would be the end of it. And that's how it works in JavaScript and Java and all sorts of standard languages. So maybe it's just a hint that you're not in Kansas anymore, or not in a typical programming environment. We're scripting. Okay, so we're saying, what does this equal? Does it equal stop? So the first section here is yes. If it equals stop, I'm just going to write a little message to the screen, and then I'm going to call this function here, this functionality. Start EC2 instance, which fortunately for us starts the EC2 instance. We pass it the instance ID. This is saying I'm sending you instance ID, and here is the instance ID, which we have from up here. All right, and then we have the else side of this statement. So if it's not equal to stop, we're going to write out and say EC2 instance, and then we're going to show our instance is already running. Okay, that's well and good. But when I run this script, you know, I don't really care if it's running or not. What I really want is not to have to go to AWS and grab the instance name and go to RDS and paste it in there. That's all, you know, time waste and stuff that I don't need to have open. So we're going to do a little loop here, and I got to tell you why we're doing a loop. We're doing a loop because if I simply run this code down here, and I'll tell you what that does in a little bit. If we run this code down here, right after checking this if statement, and we had to start the EC2 instance, well, it's not running yet, and it had this weird thing of instead of returning a null or a blank, it returned the last IP address that the system used. And that made me unhappy because it would do everything I wanted it to do, but when I clicked connect, it wouldn't connect to the right IP address. It wouldn't connect at all. So it takes time, as you saw before, for the server to go from stopped to running. And that's what we're looking for. So we have a timeout here. We're going to do this up to 60 times. Well, actually, no, 60 is how long this thing was going to last. Okay. And then timer is equal to this function here. We're starting a timer. Okay. So now it's starting at 0, presumably it's going to go to 60. Well, it's not going to go to 60. It's going to go to 60 after comparison here. Okay. So now we have a while statement, which, you know, like VB6, we might have been like do while or loop until. So while $timer, this guy right here, which we just started, is less than the timeout, which we defined right here. So elapsed seconds is less than 60. Pretty good. And if it starts at 0, then that's 60 seconds. And with a dash in here, weird, I'm telling you, from a programming perspective. And then we do our get instance. We're going to get the state, just like we did up here, right? And that's kind of neat. If you highlight something and it shows up anywhere else in the code, you can see it. Probably a good kick in the head that you really shouldn't be doing it again, but I think it's not avoidable in this case, that talking thing. So we're checking this now, and we're saying, is it not equal to running? Well, if it's not equal to running, and the timer is less than the timeout, we're going to enter this loop here. We're going to start sleep. This is your old processing time waiting. I want to wait. So this is I'm waiting for a second. And then we're writing output waiting for server. And there's my server ID, my EC2 ID to be in a running state. So it waited a second, it wrote the message, it goes back to the top, it compares. Hey, is it greater than 60? Because we don't want it to be a runaway loop. And is the instance running? All right, or not running. If it is running, though, it's going to drop out of the loop that we're we're going to stop that timer. We're going to write some output here. Server is up and running. Set variable, RDS name. And we're calling another function again. And we want the public DNS name. Why do we want this? Because we're going to open up RDS and we're going to pre-fill it with the correct value. So here we go, $RDS. That's our, I'm just writing it to the screen. And then down here, we're calling MSTSC, which is RDS, which is weird. And we're feeding it the IP address. And it's going to open it up. And then I've got a little comment here. So if I highlight this and I copy it down here, it's going to go ahead and stop the instance. So then I don't have to go to AWS console at all. Alright, and this is not the only way we can do this, and even in PowerShell, this is not the only way we can do this. That's what programming is about. There's many paths to a final destination. Alright, take 3. Okay, so as I was going through the code, I discovered there was an error. There was a second S on this diagnostics, which caused it to not function properly. But now, we should be pretty good. So let's go ahead and just give it a run. We'll do start debugging, even though we're not debugging. And there we go, so we got some output. The status is stopped, starting it now. And now we're in our little wait loop. And there we go. We've got our IP address. It got written to the window. And now it's starting remote desktop. Now, even though the server is in a running state, it might take a second or 2 or 10 before it actually starts up. And there we go. We're off and running. Alrighty. Or as that one character says in Star Trek Lower Decks, okie dokie. And this is all good. Alright. So that's more than enough for this session. And I'm going to put that code up onto GitHub and leave it out there for anyone to use if they want to.